The note was 4 words long, and it was written on the back of a luggage tag, and Naomi found it the way she found everything in that hotel, by reaching where other people did not bother to look. She was on her knees beside the bed in room 12, one gloved hand sweeping under the mattress for the socks and earbuds and phone chargers that guests forgot when her fingers touched stiff paper. She pulled it out. She turned it over in the grey light coming through the half-drawn curtain. 4 words in a careful slanted hand. You were always kind. And beneath that, smaller, almost an afterthought, a single name she did not recognize and a phone number with a country code she had never dialed. She had no idea that the man who wrote it had been watching her for 6 years. She had no idea that the words on that tag would, before the season turned, settle a debt she could not even let herself name out loud. She tucked the tag into the front pocket of her uniform the way she tucked away everything that did not fit the next 20 minutes, and she stripped the bed, and she moved on to room 14, because there were 19 rooms left and her shift ended at 3, and her son's medicine had to be picked up before the pharmacy closed at 6. This is a story about a woman who cleaned other people's rooms for 8 years and was certain all the way down, but no one was keeping count. If you've ever done the quiet work that nobody thanks you for, the work that holds a whole building up while the world walks past it in good shoes, stay with this one. It was kept. All of it was kept. Naomi Carter was 36 years old, and she had worked at the Lansdowne Inn since the spring her son was born. The Lansdowne was not a grand hotel. It sat 4 blocks off the interstate on the north side of the city, 91 rooms over 3 floors, a brick building the colour of dried clay with a green awning that had faded to the colour of old money. Business travellers stayed there and families passing through, and once a month a tour bus of retirees on their way to the casinos 2 hours south. The carpet in the hallways was patterned to hide stains. The ice machine on the second floor had been broken since the year Naomi started, and nobody had ever fixed it, and she had learned to tell guests gently that the working one was down on one. She made $12.40 an hour. She cleaned, on a good day, 22 rooms in an 8-hour shift, which came out to a little over a room every 20 minutes, beds stripped and remade with hospital corners, bathrooms scrubbed to a shine, mirrors wiped, the little paper bands folded around the toilet seats, the coffee packets restocked, the trash carried down. On a bad day, a checkout left a room so wrecked it ate 45 minutes by itself, and she made up the difference by skipping her own lunch, eating a granola bar standing in the linen closet, her back against the warm shelving where the towels came up from the dryers. Her cart was the same cart she had pushed for 8 years, a steel frame with one wheel that pulled left, so that she walked the long hallways at a slight angle, leaning into it the way a person leans into wind. She knew the carts the way some people know a horse. She knew which shelf held the good rags and which held the ones gone thin, where the spare rolls fit so they did not tumble when the bad wheel caught a seam in the carpet, how to balance the trash bag on the rail so it rode there without dragging. She loaded it at 4:50 every morning in the basement supply room under a single buzzing light, and she pushed it into the service elevator, and she rode up alone to whatever floor the board assigned her, and the day began. The hotel at that hour was a quiet she had come to need. No guests yet, no phones, only the hum of the ice machine on one and the smell of the industrial soap and her own breath and the soft list of the cart pulling left. There was an order to a room, and she had found it years ago and never varied it, because the order was what let her think about other things while her hands worked. Strip the bed first, sheets into the bag, pillows set on the chair. Open the curtains for the light, trash and recycling, next, the cups upright, the little soaps counted. Bathroom after that, the mirror last, so it would not fog from the shower. She ran to test the drain. Then the bed remade, the corners tight, the spread smoothed with the flat of both hands in one long pass from the headboard down, a motion she could have done in her sleep, and sometimes felt she did. Coffee restocked, 2 packets, sugar, and the powdered cream. A final look from the doorway, the way a painter steps back to see the room the way a tired stranger would see it at the end of a long drive, and to make it, for that stranger, a small kindness they would never know to thank her for. She did this for her son. His name was Dree, short for Andre, and he was 6 years old that first spring, and he was 11 now, And somewhere in the middle of those years, a doctor had said a word to her in a cold, bright room that split her life into a before and an after. The word was a name for a thing in his blood, a thing that meant infusions every few weeks, and a specialist an hour's bus ride away, and a stack of bills that grew on the kitchen counter no matter how fast she worked. She did not say the word out loud, not to her co-workers, not to her mother on the phone, not even to Dre, who knew only that he had to go to the doctor more than other kids did, and that his mother always found a way to take him. She remembered the day of the diagnosis the way you remember the few days that rearrange you. Dre had been 5, almost 6, bruising in places he had not bumped, tired in a way a small boy should not be tired. The doctor was a young woman with kind eyes who chose her words carefully, and still could not make them soft enough. Naomi had held the edge of the examination table because the room had tilted, and she had nodded as though she understood, and she had asked the only question that mattered, which was, "What do we do?" And the doctor had told her, and then a different person had come in with papers about cost, and Naomi had understood, sitting there with her boy swinging his legs and watching a cartoon on a screen in the corner, that the two halves of her life from then on would be the keeping of him well and the paying for it, and that the second half would try every month to swallow the first. She had walked Dre to the bus stop afterward and bought him a soft pretzel with money she did not have, because he asked for one. And she had watched him eat it on the bench, and she had decided in that minute, fully and forever, that he would never carry the weight of the second half. That was hers. He would carry only the being a boy. The mornings she took him to the clinic were the hardest mornings, and she would not have traded a single one. She traded shifts to get them, owed favors for them, rode the early bus across the city with Dre half asleep against her arm, his backpack of comic books, and the snacks she packed because the vending machines there cost more than the snacks were worth. She learned the nurses by name, and they learned her. She sat in the chair beside his while the line went into the back of his small hand, and she read the comic books out loud, doing all the voices badly until he laughed. Because a boy who is laughing is not a boy who is afraid, and she had decided he would not be afraid. Then she took him to school late with a note, and she went to work later still, and she made up the room she had missed by staying past 3, and the day was 18 hours long, and she did it again 2 weeks after, and again for years, and she did not break, because there was no version of breaking that did not land on him. What the bills came to by that 8th year was a number Naomi tried not to look at directly, the way you do not look straight at the sun. It was past $40,000. Some of it was on a payment plan with the hospital that took $90 out of every check before the check ever reached her hands. Some of it was on a credit card she had stopped opening the statements for. All of it sat under everything she did, a floor beneath the floor, and she carried it from room to room the way she carried her cart, without complaint, because complaint did not change the weight, and the weight was hers. Here is the thing about Naomi that the people she cleaned for never saw. She was kind in the small, invisible ways that cost money she did not have, and time she could not spare. When a guest left a wallet in a drawer, she walked it down to the front desk and watched the clerk log it. Every time, even the year someone left $400 cash folded inside a hotel Bible, and she stood in that room alone with it for a long minute and then carried it down. When an old man in 215 could not work the thermostat and called the desk angry, she went up on her own break and knelt by the unit and showed him twice, until he could do it himself, and she never told him it was her lunch she had spent. When the night auditor's daughter needed someone to watch her after school for a week, Naomi took the child to her own apartment and fed her dinner and asked for nothing. The $400 she remembered, the way you remember a test, nearly failed, and did not. It was a Thursday, a checkout, the room a wreck of late checkout and early flight, and the Bible was on the floor by the bed where it had slid, and when she picked it up to set it back in the drawer, the bills fanned out from between the pages, 4 crisp hundreds, more than 2 weeks of her take-home after the hospital took its 90. The pharmacy bill was due that Friday. Dre needed shoes. She stood there in the empty room with the money in her hand and the door open behind her and the cart pulling left in the hall, and she did the arithmetic. The same arithmetic that never came out, and then she folded the bills back into the Bible and carried it down and set it on the desk and said a guest left this in 12. The clerk that day was new and counted it in front of her, surprised, and asked did she want her name on the log in case it went unclaimed, the finder's claim, 30 days. And Naomi said no, just logged that it was found, and she went back up to her cart. And 3 weeks later, she did not ask whether anyone had come for it, because the not asking was the whole of the thing. She did not do these things for a story. She did them because a room was a small world she had charge of for 20 minutes, and she could not constitutionally leave a small world worse than she found it. She straightened the photographs guests left on nightstands so they faced the bed. She set the TV remote where a hand would find it in the dark. When a child had clearly been sick in a room, she cleaned it without a word of complaint to the desk and left an extra set of towels and a note that said "Feel better soon" in a hand a child could read. None of it was in her job. All of it was in her, and it asked for nothing and got nothing for 8 years, and she had made her peace with that long ago. Thought she had, which is a different thing. She was not a saint. She would have laughed at the word, laughed, and then gotten back to work. She was tired in a way that had set into her bones. Some nights she sat on the edge of the bathtub after Dre was asleep and put her face in a towel so he would not hear her, and then she washed her face and went to bed because 4:40 came early. Still, the kindness was real, and it was steady, and it asked for nothing, and that is a rare and quiet thing in this world, rarer than people think, and it does not go unrecorded as often as the people who practice it believe. The man in room 12 checked in on a Tuesday in the second week of October. Naomi did not see him arrive. She knew room 12 the way she knew all of them, by what it held when she came to clean. He was tidy. That was the first thing. He made his own bed most mornings, pulling the spread up clumsily so that she only had to straighten it, and he stacked his used towels in a neat pile on the bathroom floor instead of leaving them sodden in the tub. He drank black coffee, 2 packets every morning, and he set the empty paper cups upright in the trash. There was a worn leather Bible on the nightstand the second day and a pair of reading glasses, and a single-framed photograph he travelled with, a small one, of a woman in a yellow dress laughing on a porch, which Naomi dusted around carefully and never moved. He stayed 11 days. That was a long time for the Lansdowne, where most guests turned over in 2 or 3. By the 4th day, she had started to think of room 12 as a kind of relief in her circuit, the easy room, the room that did not punish her. She left an extra coffee packet there without quite deciding to. The next day there was a folded paper towel on the nightstand with $2 on it, and in that careful slanted hand the word "thank you." She had not been tipped in months. She stood there a moment. Then she put the $2 in her pocket and felt something she did not have a name for, and she got back to work, because room 14 was a checkout and checkouts did not wait. She and the man crossed paths exactly twice in those 11 days. The first time she was wheeling her cart out of room 10 and he was coming down the hall, an older man, somewhere in his 60s, tall and gone a little soft through the shoulders, with close-cropped white hair and a tan camel coat that had been good once and was still cared for. He had a cane. He did not seem to need so much as lean on at the end of a long walk. He nodded to her. "Good morning," he said. "You keep these rooms beautiful." And she said, "Thank you, sir," the way she said it to everyone, and she did not think about it again, because 100 guests a year said something pleasant and meant it for the length of a hallway. The second time was different. It was the 9th day, late, near the end of her shift. She had stayed past 3 to finish a checkout on 2 that had run long, and she was carrying a stack of fresh towels past room 12 when she heard a sound through the door that stopped her. It was not loud. It was a man crying, the careful, contained crying of someone who has had a great deal of practice doing it alone, and she stood in the hallway with the towels in her arms and did not know what to do, because there is no line in any employee handbook for the sound of grief behind a door you are not supposed to open. She knocked. She told herself afterward she should not have, that it was not her place. But she knocked, softly, and the crying stopped. And after a moment the door opened, and the old man stood there with his eyes red and his camel coat off and his tie loosened, and he looked at her, and she held out the towels, because they were the only thing in her hands, and said, "I brought you some extra, I heard." She started, and then she stopped, because she did not want to say what she had heard. "Are you all right?" she said instead. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back and said, "Would you sit with me a minute?" And against every rule of that building, against the clock and the shift and the medicine she had to pick up, she set the towels on the dresser, and she sat in the chair by the window, and she sat with him. His name, he told her, was Walter. He did not give a last name, and she did not ask. He told her he had come to the city to bury his wife. The woman in the yellow dress. Naomi understood, though he did not point to the photograph and she did not look at it. 41 years, he said. They had met in this city a long time ago when they were young and had nothing, and they had left it and built a life somewhere else. And now he had brought her home, and the funeral had been Monday, and he was staying on a few more days because he could not yet make himself get on the plane and leave her in the ground in a place he no longer lived. "I keep thinking," he said, "that if I stay a little longer, I will figure out how to go." And Naomi, who knew a great deal about staying a little longer because you could not yet figure out how to go, said nothing and let the silence be a kind of company. And after a while he thanked her, and she gathered herself and stood and said she was sorry for his loss, and she meant it more than the words could hold. He talked in the way of a man who had not talked to anyone in days, in small circles that came back around to her. He told her how they had met his wife and him at a lunch counter 4 blocks from where they sat, she behind it and he too poor to order more than coffee, and how she had slid him a slice of pie one afternoon and said the cook made it wrong and it would only go to waste, which was a lie, a kind lie, the first kindness anyone had shown him in that city. And he had married her 11 months later, and never once in 41 years. Let her pay for her own pie again. He laughed when he said it, a wet, broken laugh, and Naomi laughed with him. And for a moment the room held something that was not grief, or was grief turned briefly toward the light. Then he was quiet. He turned the cane in his hands. He said the worst part was not the missing her. He had expected the missing. The worst part was that all the things they had done together were now things only he remembered, that her whole life was now stored in one failing place, him, and he did not know how to carry a thing that heavy alone. Naomi did not try to fix it because she had learned long ago that grief is not a thermostat you can kneel down and show someone how to work. She only said that he was carrying it right now in this chair, that the carrying was the love and there was no putting it down, and that he was doing it even tonight. Even badly, even alone, he was doing it. He looked at her for a long moment when she said that something moved behind his eyes that she would only understand much later, a recognition, a door opening on 40 years. "You sound like her," he said quietly. "You sound exactly like her." And he did not explain, and Naomi did not ask, because the clock on the nightstand said 2:50, and there was a boy across the city who needed his medicine by 6, and a bus that came when it came. "You have a kind face," he said, as she reached the door. "My wife used to say, you can always tell." And Naomi smiled and said her wife sounded like a wise woman, and she left, and she picked up Dre's medicine with 11 minutes to spare, and she did not think that the 11 days of room 12 were anything more than 11 days of room 12. 2 mornings later, the room was empty, the bed was made. Clumsily, the way he made it. The towels were stacked on the bathroom floor. The Bible was gone from the nightstand, and so were the glasses, and so was the photograph of the woman in the yellow dress. The coffee cups stood upright in the trash, and under the pillow, when Naomi lifted it to strip the bed, was the luggage tag with the 4 words on the back, and the name she did not know, and the phone number with the country code she had never dialed. "You were always kind." She stood with it in the grey light for longer than she could afford. Then she put it in her pocket and finished the room, because the cart did not push itself, and the day did not stop for a piece of cardboard, and she told herself she would think about it later, the way she told herself about most things. She did not call the number. For 3 weeks she did not call it. The tag lived in the front pocket of every uniform shirt, transferred each morning when she dressed in the dark, and some part of her knew it mattered, and some larger part of her was afraid of it, because hope was a thing she had learned to ration, and a forward note from a grieving stranger was not a thing a careful woman built anything on. She had bills to look at instead. The hospital had sent a letter that month moving Dre's specialist to a clinic across the state line, which meant a longer trip and a cost her insurance covered less of, and she had spent a night at the kitchen table with a calculator doing arithmetic that would not come out, no matter how she pushed the numbers, no matter how many lunches she skipped. It was Dree who made her call. He found the tag. He was helping her fold laundry, which he insisted on doing, now that he was 11, and the man of the house, his words, said with a seriousness that broke her heart a little every time, and he pulled her work shirt out of the basket, and the tag fell out, and he picked it up and read it the way kids read things, out loud and without permission. "You were always kind," he read. "Mom, who's this?" And she took it from him gently and looked at it, really looked at it, the careful slant of the writing, the name, the number, and she thought about Walter in the chair by the window saying, "You can always tell." And she thought about $40,000 and a clinic across the state line. And she thought, what is the worst that happens? A stranger does not answer and she has lost nothing. She called the number that night after Dre was asleep, sitting on the edge of the bathtub, where she did her hardest things. It rang 4 times. A woman answered, brisk and professional, and said a name. Naomi did not catch, an office of some kind, and asked how she could help. And Naomi, who had rehearsed nothing, said, "I'm sorry, I think I have the wrong number. A man named Walter gave me this. I cleaned his room," and the woman on the other end went very quiet, and then she said, "Please hold," in a voice that had changed completely, and Naomi held, on the edge of the bathtub, her heart going hard, for 90 long seconds until a different voice came on the line. This new voice belonged to a man younger than Walter, careful and warm. He said, "Is this the woman from the Lansdowne?" And Naomi said, "Yes." And he said, "My name is Reuben. I worked for Mr. Hartley for 20 years, and I have been hoping you would call." He had hoped, he said, for 3 weeks. Walter had told him about her. Walter had told a great many people about her, it turned out, in the last weeks of his life, because Walter Hartley had been a sick man himself when he came to the city to bury his wife, sicker than he let on to a hotel maid in a chair by a window, and he had died 9 days after he flew home, quietly in his own bed, with the photograph of the woman in the yellow dress on the nightstand beside him. Naomi sat very still on the edge of the bathtub. "I'm so sorry," she said. "He was kind to me." And Reuben said, "No," and his voice caught, "You have it backwards." And then he told her the thing she had not known, the thing the 4 words on the luggage tag had been pointing at all along, the gap she had been living inside for 8 years without ever seeing its shape. Walter Hartley had grown up in this city. He had grown up poor, 4 blocks off what was now the interstate, in a building that no longer stood. And his mother had cleaned rooms. She had cleaned rooms in a hotel that no longer stood either for very little money, for many years, and she had raised him alone, and she had died before he made the money that would have made her life easy, died still cleaning rooms, and Walter had never forgiven the world its arithmetic, that a woman could give everything she had to the small invisible work and be paid almost nothing and be remembered by almost no one. He had made a great deal of money in the decades after. He had built something and sold it, and built something else. And every year, on the anniversary of his mother's death, he went back to a hotel, some ordinary hotel, somewhere, and he stayed a while, and he watched, and he waited to see if he could find one. Just one who did the work the way his mother had done it, for its own sake, kindly, expecting nothing. In 40 years, Reuben said, he found 4. You are the 4th. Naomi did not understand, at first, what she was being told. She understood the words. She did not understand that they were about her, that the careful old man in the camel coat had been, in the chair by her window, taking the measure of her whole 8 years, had seen the extra coffee packet and the wallet logged at the desk, and the way she knelt by an old man's thermostat on her own lunch, had heard, somehow, in the way she sat with him in his grief asking for nothing, the exact frequency of his mother's kindness, and had decided, before he ever left room 12, that she would be the 4th. "He left you something," Reuben said. He was very specific about how. "Not a check in the mail. He said you would feel it was charity and your pride would make it small. He wanted it done a particular way. He wanted you to come. There was a foundation," Reuben explained, "that Walter had run quietly for 30 years, named for his mother, that did one thing and one thing only. It found people like her, the overlooked ones who held buildings up, and it lifted the floor beneath them so they could stand on it. It paid off the debt that was breaking them. It did not make them rich. Walter had been firm about that. Riches were a different thing and not his to give, but it made them free of the floor beneath the floor, and it sent their children to school, and it asked in return only one thing, which was that they tell no one how it had come to them, and that they keep being who they had always been. Naomi was crying now, the careful, contained crying of someone with a great deal of practice, sitting on the edge of the bathtub at 11 at night so her son would not hear. How much? She made herself ask, because she was a practical woman, and practical women ask. And Reuben told her the foundation had already pulled the records, that they knew about the hospital and the payment plan and the credit card she had stopped opening, that the number was $43,200 and some change, and that it was, as of that afternoon, paid. Every cent of it paid in full. And there was an account opened in Dre's name for the schooling Walter had not lived to see, and there was a letter, a real one, in Walter's own careful slanted hand, that Reuben would bring to her himself because Walter had asked that no one mail it. She did not believe it, not that night. She thanked Reuben and she hung up and she sat on the edge of the bathtub, and she did not believe it because she had rationed hope for 11 years, and you do not undo that in a phone call. He went to work the next morning at 4:40. She always did. She cleaned 21 rooms. She told no one. And it was only at the end of that week, when she logged into the hospital portal at the library computer, the way she did every month, to look at the number she did not look at directly, and the number was 0. The balance was 0, paid in full on a date in October, that she put her hand over her mouth in the quiet of the library and understood that it was true. Reuben came the following Tuesday. He was a tall black man in his 50s in a good grey suit, and he found her not at the hotel because Walter had been clear she was not to be made a spectacle of in front of the people she worked with, but at her apartment in the evening after her shift, when Dre was home. He sat at her small kitchen table where the bills had grown for 8 years, and he laid the letter on the wood between them, and he did not stay long because he understood that some things are meant to be read alone. Before he left, he crouched down to Dre's level and shook the boy's hand, seriously, man to man, and told him his mother was the finest person Mr. Hartley had met in many years, and that Mr. Hartley had wanted him to know that. And Dre, who did not understand any of it, stood up very straight and said, "Thank you, sir," exactly the way his mother said it. And Reuben had to look away for a moment. When he was gone, Naomi sat at the table with the letter and her son beside her, and she read it out loud, because Dre asked her to and because she found she wanted him to hear it. The letter was not long. Walter was not a man of many words. The 4 on the luggage tag had told her that. He wrote that he had watched her for 11 days and seen 40 years. He wrote about his mother, her name, the hotel that no longer stood, the way she had folded a towel. He wrote that the world keeps a ledger even when it pretends it does not, that nothing kind is ever truly lost, that it goes into the account of the world and draws a quiet interest and comes back sometimes late, sometimes long, after the one who earned it has stopped expecting anything at all, but it comes back. He wrote that she had earned this 1,000 small times over, and that accepting it was not charity, but arithmetic. The books of her life finally balanced. He asked her to do only 2 things: to let her son become whatever he was meant to become, with the floor under him solid, and to remember, on some ordinary day years from now, that an old man she barely knew had been made less afraid of dying by the simple fact of her, by the proof she was, sitting in a chair by a window asking for nothing, that the kind of person his mother had been still walked the earth and cleaned its rooms, and was not, after all, extinct. He signed it with his first name only, Walter, the same careful slant, and folded inside the letter, when she opened it the rest of the way, was a luggage tag blank with a loop of string, and she understood that he meant her to have one of her own. Naomi did not leave the Lansdowne. People expected her to. When the story slowly became known in the small way stories become known, the manager who noticed the payment plan deduction had stopped. The co-worker who saw her smile differently. She could have left, The debt was gone, and the account for Dre was real and growing, and she had, for the first time in her adult life, a small margin under her, a few $100s that stayed in the account from 1 month to the next instead of being eaten the day it arrived. She did not leave, though, because the work had never been the thing breaking her. The floor beneath the floor had been the thing, and that was gone now. And the work, the actual work of making a tired room clean and ready for a stranger, was work she was good at, and did not mind, and had, in some way she could not explain to anyone, come to love. What changed was smaller and larger than leaving. She slept. For the first time in years, she slept the whole night through and woke at 4:40 rested and stood in the linen closet with her back against the warm shelving. Not to choke down a granola bar in place of lunch, but because she liked the warmth and had a minute now to feel it. She took Dre to his infusions and signed the forms and walked out without the cold hand that used to close on her chest at the sight of the total. She started leaving the extra coffee packet in every room she cleaned, not just the easy ones, 2 packets and a folded paper towel, and on it, in her own hand, the words, "You matter," because she had learned what 4 words could do. A year passed, and then another. Dre turned 13 and grew 4 inches and tested into a program for kids who were good at numbers, which he was fiercely, and the account Walter had opened paid for the bus pass and the calculator and the trip to the state competition where he placed 3rd and called her from the lobby so excited he could barely talk. Naomi framed the letter. She did not frame it on the wall where guests to the apartment might ask about it, because she had promised to tell no one, and she kept that promise the way she kept all her promises. Completely. She framed it small and kept it on her own nightstand beside a photograph she had bought a frame for of Dre at the competition holding his ribbon, and beside the blank luggage tag on which one quiet evening near the 2nd anniversary she finally wrote 4 words of her own and hung the loop of string over the corner of the frame. She wrote them for the next person. She did not know yet who it would be. A co-worker drowning, a young single mother on the bus to the same clinic, a tired man kneeling by a thermostat. She only knew the way, Walter had known, that you keep watching and you wait, and when you find one, just one, who does the small invisible work for its own sake and asks for nothing, you lift the floor beneath them if you can, and if you cannot lift it, you at least let them know it was seen. Because it is seen. That was the whole of what the old man in the camel coat had come 4 blocks off the interstate to tell her, and she believed it now, all the way down, the way she had once been certain of the opposite. If you have ever done the quiet work that holds something up, the work nobody claps for, and wondered whether anyone anywhere was keeping count, let me tell you what Naomi would say if you asked her, which she would say plainly, without raising her voice, because she never needed to. Someone is keeping count, maybe not someone you would expect. Maybe an old man in a chair by a window you will forget by Friday. The ledger is real, and it is patient, and it does not lose a single entry. The blank tag on Naomi's nightstand did not stay blank, and the letter in its small frame did not gather dust, and the boy who once folded laundry and called himself the man of the house grew up with a solid floor beneath him and never knew, for many years, exactly how it came to be solid. Only that his mother had a way of leaving 2 coffee packets and a kind word in rooms full of strangers she would never meet, as though she were paying something forward into a ledger she trusted completely, as though somewhere the account was still open, still drawing its quiet interest, still waiting the way it had waited for her. For the next person who reached where no one else bothered to look and found under the pillow the thing that had been left there all along. If this story moved you, I would love to know the kindness you do that no one sees. Tell me about it. And if you believe, as Naomi came to believe, that nothing good is ever truly lost, there is another story waiting for you, about a man who gave away his coat on the coldest night of the year and learned, a long time later, exactly whose shoulders he had warmed.